What's going on, everybody? Sean from Lumix Live here, and while we are away on vacation, we still wanted to get you a video, and particularly for this week, I wanted to really kind of talk more about what you can do with the Lumix cameras after, from a photography perspective, given the feedback we got a lot from last week's stream, how you can work with these files in post and provide a bit of a refresher on what advantages you have and what capabilities you have in programs like Adobe Camera Raw as the primary, but then also take a look at things like Capture One and some of the other programs out there to really kind of show you the flexibility you have with the RAW files from our cameras. Now that we're right into the holiday season, you know, we all have a lot of the professional stuff that we're doing day in and day out throughout the year, but even in the holiday times, it's usually still a good idea, you know, to play around with your camera, whether it's expanding into areas that maybe you're not normally, you know, using your camera for, and that could be in the photography side if you've primarily been working in video, or if you're just someone who wants to really just take your camera out and go have some fun with it. So we're going to take a look at some photos. We're going to walk through some of the different settings that you have in the cameras. And then, yeah, we'll jump into Lightroom and take a look and go from there. So let's get going. All right, so I've got a selection of lenses here, or not lenses, but images that I've captured with various different lenses. So some adapted, some native lenses from our system, and a varying level of different kind of photos. Some with the S5, some with my S1R, and actually my full spectrum converted S1R. And basically, what I wanted to do was jump in here into Lightroom and show you a couple of the things that really kind of become a benefit for you when you are actually going to be wanting to take these photos, put them into the software, and then want to work with them. Because most people, I find, when you work, and again, this is specifically to ACR, so any of the Adobe Camera Raw outlets, most people tend to find that you may have settings that are already by default set up that are not giving you the best kind of result for your photos as a baseline. So that can cause some frustration when you start working with the photos. You know, chief among them is really just the fact that if you do work in an Adobe workflow, by default, the camera is going to be imported into ACR using Adobe's colors. So Adobe Camera Raw will take that image, and instead of using the camera color profiles, you're going to be working with Adobe Standard. And for a lot of people, you'll find that it's not as accurate as you may want it to be, and it's not how you captured it when you first created that image. It's not what you saw when you were making that photo in the camera. So one of the first things that you basically want to kind of do if you're going to be working with the photos on the camera is you're going to want to go into the preferences for Adobe Camera Raw. In this case, I'm using it for Lightroom. And you're going to want to go under the preset setting that you see here. And you're going to want to change the global settings here for raw defaults and change that to camera settings. So what this does right now is this says, hey, read the metadata, whatever that color profile that was chosen and used in camera, make sure that is what is applied to that image when it's brought in for raw editing. And an easy way to see the difference here is I'll take this kind of more vibrant looking image here from the Austin Motel. And you'll see right here I've got it set up as camera standard. But if I come in here and I go into, well, actually do it into here, where I can select all of the different color profiles, you'll see that if I go here to Adobe Standard, you'll see that the colors are a little more muted than what the camera matched color profiles actually are. Where if I come in then and I go to, let's bring this into camera standard, you'll see that the blacks get a little bit deeper, the contrast gets pumped up a little bit more, and the color tonality changes a little bit. So first step with any of these cameras is if you know that you liked the way the image looked when you were working in camera and you're bringing it into ACR, check this. See if the camera is or if the software by default is using their default color profiling. If you don't want it to be like that, go in, change it to what the default settings are, in this case, camera settings or camera matched, and then you'll be able to actually utilize the profiles that are from the camera. The nice thing with this too is when you go into this view, which has all of the different color profiles selected, you can easily just kind of go right over these and see, you know, how is that going to look? Is it going to represent, you know, kind of the way I want it without actually having to go into it? But more importantly, you can actually star these so that instead of having to go into the browser part of this, anytime I click on profile, I'll have all of the color profiles that I've starred here, which in my case is all of the Lumix profiles, all of the profiles for the Lumix cameras. In this case, we're looking at the S5, so you'll see that I have all of these different options available. Now, right in line with this is that kind of secondary step that I see a lot of people asking questions about online is that, well, if I'm coming from video and I'm shooting stills, I have the camera set in Vlog for a color profile, but every time I shoot in that profile and I bring those raw files into the camera, they look 2 stops underexposed, or they look really, really dark. Well, depending on the camera that you choose to work with, you'll see that you've got a couple of options. Not all of the cameras will have the profiling built into Adobe, but in the S5's case, Vlog is a selectable color profile. So if you shot a photo in Vlog, now as long as you set the color matching, again, that is in the Edit, Preference, under the presets, make sure that raw defaults are set to camera settings. What it will do is it will import that photo with the Vlog color profile, so it's going to look like flat, gray Vlog footage. And you'll see that even if I take a shot that was taken in standard, if I switch it to Vlog, you'll see that it crushes everything into the middle of the range. Now granted, this shot is not meant to be shot in Vlog. It was not captured in Vlog, so it's not really right to do that. But you have that flexibility with cameras like the S5. Not, like, again, as I said, not all of the cameras are going to have that capability. In some instances, if you shot a photo in Vlog with RAW, you kind of have to boost your shadows up in post. It all depends on whether or not that profiling has been built in with Adobe or not. So, yeah, use that for kind of setting your baseline with all the images. The other thing that is also included with the Lumix cameras, especially all of the newer ones, is no matter what aspect ratio you have captured an image in. So say I go to an image like this. This is an infrared image, so I was playing around with the actual kind of like flaring that you get from an infrared image. It's way more wild than you get with a standard visible spectrum image. So I've got this image here, I've got this crazy flare, but one of the things that a lot of people will do is, you know, set up the aspect ratio in the camera. So in our cameras, we've got everything from 1:1 to 65 by 24, which is that, like, think of it as like the X-Pan, you know, double 35mm wide frame aspect ratio. So if you're someone who shoots in those aspect ratios, one of the things that you'll know is that when you capture in those, you'll have the image initially import into Lightroom like this. You'll have the aspect ratio shown that you chose, even if you shot in RAW. But no matter what, except for a GH5S and a BGH1, or any of the multi-aspect ratio sensors, the file is always still saved as the full aspect ratio from the camera. So that means that at any given point, I can click here into the crop, and I will always have the full 3:2 or the 4:3 aspect ratio that the camera had captured. So you're never really always stuck with the aspect ratio that you choose while you're out in the field. This makes it actually super fun to use things like 65 by 24 or the 2:1 aspect ratio, because you can think of framing differently that way. You can play around with, you know, I want to shoot maybe more landscape style photos, but I don't necessarily want to, you know, be forced to have to stick with that. There are times where you may come back after shooting and you've got a 65 by 24 looking image, you love it, it's great, And then you click that crop button and you're like, well, you know, if this was actually slid down just a little bit more to keep myself in those rule of thirds, you know, I would like the image a lot better. So play around with the actual aspect ratios that you have in the camera. We have them there for a reason, because there are times when you want to shoot in all of these different modes. But know that when you shoot in RAW, you are always still saving that initial full area and full resolution image. You will not be locked out of being able to go back and change that later. The other big thing here too is, like you can see this one, because this is an S1R, we talk about the differences that you see in what color profiles are available within Lightroom based on the RAW file. In this case, you'll see the S1R has a bit more limited selections here. So things from standard, and since this is infrared, you'll see you get that red looking image out of it. But your options are a little bit more limited than if I were to go to like my S5 image here and then go in, and you'll see how many more options you have. The other cool thing too is that if you've actually used things like color checkers and you're working in for those profiles, because I imported this in based on the S5, it knows that it's the S5, that will only apply to cameras that pull up that information. So it knows that, okay, hey, this was that profile created for that camera. So yeah, you've got that kind of flexibility. Play around with it. That cropping, being able to recrop an image later is such a nice capability. It really does just give you more flexibility to play around with and not have to be too concerned with, you know, being stuck with whatever framing that you did at that moment. Now, some of the other things with all of our cameras is we have a number of different features built into some of the different platforms. So we're going to talk about the S5 primarily right now. And the S5 has this functionality called Live View Composite. We've talked about it numerous times. And right now, given that it's getting darker out, you know, earlier in the day, although at the time of recording this, I believe we're in the winter solstice, so now it's actually going to start getting lighter earlier in the afternoons. We have Live View Composite built into the camera, and what that allows you to do is to create images like this, where I can have a cityscape still properly exposed, if it's done correctly, as long as my exposure would have been correct. You can get cityscapes properly exposed while still pulling in all of these kinds of light trails and star trails that typically you'd have to do and capture in multiple images, taking a lot more time, and then bringing them into Photoshop to then merge them and create these kinds of images out of it. So this allows me to do it all at once and actually have the image build so that I can see it build and then stop it when I think it's ready. Now, an image that I think kind of really exemplifies this, so while this is just, you know, star trails, which is cool, you know, we've got some really nice looking star trails there, fun. You can also do a lot of light painting with this. So this is the S5 as well. So I've got my S5, I did a Live View Composite here, and that's how I can keep the highlight information up in this region for the marquee sign here, and then still have all of the light trails build on this image and then stop it when I want. But what Live View Composite also allows you to do is for scenes like this, where I've got all of this bright light in front of me, you'll see that typically you have to choose. You end up losing your highlights out of this region. So that means that, again, I would end up having to do multiple different shots to then pull the stars out of the sky here. Well, you don't really have to do that much anymore. If I just come in here and click auto just to quickly jump in and have this image get brought up, you'll see that I was able to actually pull the stars out of the sky in this same image. So while I still maintain all of my detail down here in the highlight region, if I even pull all of this back, you'll see how much highlight retention there actually was in that image. I still have all of this capability of pulling in these stars, and if I ran this even longer, you'd be able to actually create star trails like this in a fully lit city environment like that. And further than that, the flexibility that we have in the RAW files for the S cameras is pretty impressive. So being able to go from this, where you can barely tell that there is a crane right here, to just one click being able to come in and have a solid, well exposed and low noise looking image here, and this is shot at 640 ISO, I'm able to actually still very easily work with this kind of stuff. So now, as you can see, here's a different program that you can take a look at. If you're someone who's getting into working with your Lumix camera and you don't necessarily know what software solution you want to go with, or if you just want to try something different, Silkypix is a program that we provide with all of the Lumix cameras when you purchase them. This is always the program that ends up having the first RAW support for the cameras. It usually has probably the most flexibility across the board, though full transparency, this is not necessarily an easy program to work with unless you're really in this kind of mindset with how things are set up. Myself personally, it works. I use it for certain things where I know I can get maybe a better kind of conversion from my RAW file. When we were working with the GH6 at first, this was the software that you had to use before Adobe Camera Raw or any of the other programs added support. So I felt it was important to at least talk about this program a little bit too. But what's nice about this is that you get the full information as to when, all of the metadata about the image, all of your basic information saved here. If you actually had the GPS information being tagged while you're using the Bluetooth connection through the app, you've got that flexibility here. It'll tell you all of that information. But this also gives you all of that, the core base stuff. What metering mode was used, what aperture were you using exposure bias, all of that stuff. And again, here I'm working with my S1R, as you can see. So this was shot with my S1R. This is in infrared, so this is the monochrome 850 nanometer infrared, and I was using the 35 millimeter f1.8. And then on top of this, it's also ISO 6400. So what I find that's nice about this program is that you do have all of the different color profile options as well. Just like, we were talking about before with the Adobe Camera Raw suite. You have those color profiles. So in this case, I was in monochrome, it's in the software, I can just click it, it knows what profile I was using. Right here you'll see it's monochrome D, but I can go in and play around with the different monochrome profiles that I want to work with. Typically for my infrared work, I'm usually using L monochrome D for that. But on top of it, I can also come in. This program has some pretty good noise reduction algorithms. So if I want to go in and turn all of that off for my still image for the initial conversion, and then go back and do that noise reduction with a different program. So say I really like Neat Noise Neat Noise would be video, but if I really like things like Topaz and their noise reduction, but I don't want to end up like double up on noise reduction for the different programs, I can use something like Silkypix, come in here and just strip all of the noise reduction off of the image so that it is legitimately just how the image came with no noise reduction, and then bring that file into post and into a second post level, and then do some noise reduction there or play around with the different programs that are available now. So you have a little bit more flexibility in this than you would in some of the other programs because this typically gets much earlier access to the raw files anyway, so you have more just control. You also have many different versions of sharpening options available. All the different defaults you'll always see will be with these little arrows in this program. But outside of that, the program can be a bit overwhelming for some users if you've never really worked with it before. You have things like, your curves adjustments if you just want to do some basic editing like you would. In my case, the program's also not really the most fast optimized for, working with ultra high resolution images in my case, and I'm working on a really high-end spec camera or a high-end spec computer. So it works for me, but if you're someone who needs to do a lot of fast-paced work in a program, yeah, this may not be the best solution for you. So that's kind of it that I have time to talk about on today. I know I had said I was going to talk about Capture One, but unfortunately, I forgot to renew my license for Capture One. So shows you how much I use that program. And that's not a slight against Capture One. Capture One is an awesome program. If you're someone who works with Capture One day in and day out, you know its benefits and where it can shine over something like Adobe Camera Raw. For some, the raw processing just seems to produce a better looking image for some. For others, it's just what you're used to. For us, for me in particular, it's kind of, I've always been, brought up on working with the Adobe software. It's what I used in school. It's what I use personally here. So that really tends to be where it's easier for a lot of people to work with, myself included. But yeah, outside of that, thank you all so much for tuning in. I'm sorry that we couldn't be live for right now, but definitely do need a little bit of a break from the last couple of weeks and as we lead up into CES. We will have another recorded stream next Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, so be sure to take a look for when we post that up. But we will be coming back live from CES. So make sure to get yourself subscribed to the channel. Make sure to turn the bell icon on with the channel so that you know when we actually post the videos, when we post up the live streams. If you don't already, get following our social accounts. It's going to be a really fun year for us. I've got a lot of cool ideas and a lot of fun things that I want to do with Lumix Live over the next year. So you don't want to miss it. If you appreciate this video or if you liked any of the information you got out of it, hit that thumbs up button. If we deserved a subscription from you, that's awesome. The more subscribers we can get, the better. That means the more I can do with this channel. But outside of that, I hope everyone has a great holiday, whether or not you celebrate it, if you have a great time off or if you have a great rest of your week. It doesn't matter. I just hope everyone has a good time over the next couple of days, and always, actually, for that matter. But yeah, other than that, take care, everybody. Be well, and we'll talk to you next week, Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time.